What's up guys, Justin here with the SketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video, we're going to check out an extension from Vali Architects for quickly creating things like site walls, railings, and paths for terrain in SketchUp. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so remember we've talked about the Vali Architects SketchUp extension suite before. It's a big collection of extensions that do things like creating fences and roofs and stairs. It's actually super powerful. And so you can either get the collection of the different instant architecture extensions, or you can also get them individually, like if you only want one or something like that. Well, one of the ones I've kind of skipped over in the past, which I probably shouldn't have, is Instant Wall, because it's actually a super powerful tool. You'd think it would be for like walls, right? For like houses and things like that. It's actually a great tool for creating site walls and like pilasters. It's got the ability to create paths. So it's actually kind of a unique extension. There's not really anything else exactly like it anywhere out there right now. But I wanted to hit on just a couple of the different features that are in here because they're actually pretty cool. I think a lot of people don't know that they're out there. So definitely stick around because I'm going to show you some really cool stuff having to do with how you can create walls working with terrains in SketchUp. All right, so we're going to jump over into SketchUp, and the first thing that I want to highlight is just what it takes to create a wall. So what you do is you install the extension, then when you pop up Instant Wall, what's going to happen is you're going to get a little menu that looks like this. So you've got three options right here, and I get a number of extensions that have this little extra gap in here. I don't know if that's a SketchUp thing or what. All the other stuff in the tool works, but I've got this little like gap in here like this. I'll go ahead and turn my mouse highlighter on here so you can see that as well. But the first thing you need to know is if you select a series of edges like this and try to run the tool, click on Make Wall, it's not going to work. That's because this works on groups of edges or curves. So if you haven't grouped this, it's going to give you an error message. So what you want to do is you want to pop this up, make sure that you've grouped it. So we're just going to select all of these edges right here. We're going to click on Make Group, and we're going to create a wall. And so the first thing you're going to notice, well, first off, you need to understand the drop down. So the drop downs are going to allow you to select the different kinds of things in this tool. So in this case, for example, if you wanted walls and fences, you would click on walls and fences. Or you can also just click on all, and then from there you can pick the different kinds of things. You're going to see a little preview right here, or you could do what I do, which is just click on this little button right here, which is going to pop up a window that shows you everything in the section you've selected. But let's say, for example, we wanted to add a wall here, and I don't care which one we pick. Let's go ahead and pick one of these crazy ones. Actually, let's pick this arcade wall right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick that, and then I'm going to close this window, and notice how arcade has popped up in here. There are options down here for editing parameters of the wall, which we're going to worry about later. But if I click on Make Wall, what it's going to do is it's going to use those edges in here to make a wall, which is pretty cool. I didn't have to do any work or anything like that in order to do that. And then if I click in here, notice how it's created different groups of different things in here. So like the pilasters, for example, are created separate from the arches, other things like that. Now you can also apply materials to these things when you activate this tool. And so there's a ton of different options in here, like a ridiculous amount of wall options, honestly. But you can create things like walls with railings, or you can create retaining walls, which we'll talk about in a minute, that actually step. But for this one, let's say that we were to pick just this wall with railing right here. We're just going to click on this option, click on Make Wall, and it's going to create that wall. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this now. So if you want to apply materials to this object, you can do that using the tools that are built in here. The thing with the materials is you're going to be able to select whatever is in your model. So like, for example, I've gone through and I've brought in swatches that contain all the bricks in the model. They don't have the stones or anything like that, but it's got the bricks and like the stack stone. There's no like concrete in here, but I could put that in here. But once you've added these to your model and then you run this tool, you can pick whatever materials are actually like living in your model, right? Not in your material library. They have to actually be in the model. But so for example, let's say that I wanted this wall to have the rough brick dark right here. we'll pick maybe a gray material. I'm just gonna pick the cinder block here because I know it's gray. It's not gonna look super gray, but that's all right. Pilaster, we'll go with the dark brick again. Or you know what, let's go with the stone coarse rough. Pilaster cap, we'll go with the gray. In the poster rail, we'll just pick a color right here. But now if I click on wall, what this is going to do is this is going to generate that same wall, but it's actually going to have materials applied to it, just like this. So you can set this to apply materials to your object when you're creating them. Now this does work with curves as well, but you have to be a little bit careful with this. So if I activate this tool, run it on a curve, right? So we're gonna pick a wall type. Let's go with one of the ones that has a bunch of pilasters in it. So maybe this is probably a good one right here. So if I run this tool, the pilasters in it, notice how I'm going to get very different spacing in here, because what this is doing is this is using the segmentation of the curve, and basically every time you get a little segment in here, it's adding a pilaster. Now you could come in here and delete out some of these pilasters, but notice how it leaves you with kind of a gap in here. So one of the things that you probably want to think about doing is if you are creating something with a curve, a lot of the time I'll use a tool like Bezier Spline from Fredo 6. And so what I've done is I've welded this into a curve, but if I right click on this Fredo Spline, sorry. So if I go to Fredo Spline and I want to edit this as a curve, what I can do is I can drop the number of segments down like this. So if I reduce segments, right, even then it's not really giving me what I want. Probably what you would do instead is go to like a polyline segmenter, because what a polyline segmenter is going to do is it's going to allow you to adjust the number of segments that are in here, right? So in this case I might say, okay, I want this to have like 12 segments, and what it's going to do is it's going to split this curve up into 12 segments like this. Well, then if I run this with that wall, I'm going to get much more like well-spaced pilasters in here like this. So sometimes you want to simplify your curve in order to get a better result using this tool. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the functions that allow you to draw on terrains. And so I've started with kind of a simple terrain like this one, which is just a flat plane. We're going to get into some more complex stuff in a second, but you've got different options in here for what your walls do when they're on a terrain. So for example, let's click in here and I want to look at one of these options. So let's go with maybe this fence right here. And so we're going to pick this fence, which is the wall flat panel. Well, when you do this, you can go into your parameters and you can set if this wall is going to slope or step. And so let's pick slope and then take a look at the way this is going to work. So what we want to do is we just want to click on make wall right here. Well, notice what this does is over here on the right hand side, it creates a wall that slopes along with this surface right here. Now obviously this is very simple with a simple surface like this, but it gives you an idea of what it's doing. Now if we were to pick this same thing over here, click on this drop down for parameters, and we're going to go in here and say that this is going to be stepped. What that's going to do is that's going to step your wall up by your step increment, right? And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to leave it to yes. We'll say no and we'll say yes for right now. We're just going to click on make wall. We'll notice how what this wall does is it steps up by whatever your increment is. And so one other thing we can do is we can adjust that wall height in here, because that wall wasn't really very tall. So in this case, I want my wall height to actually be something like 48 inches right here instead of 1 foot. But if I activate this now, notice how my wall is going to be taller, but then it's going to step up along the surface right here. So this can be really powerful for creating walls like this one inside of SketchUp. And so let's take a look at some more complex examples in here, because there's some things that you need to know about. So the first thing is you need to understand inside of your parameters, and we're just going to pick, and so let's go ahead and let's pick one of the simpler walls, like maybe one of the concrete walls that's down here, or stone. So let's go with this one right here, the retaining wall sloped. So each one of these is going to act a different way depending on the parameters that you pick, right? So there's 3 options in here for dropping to terrain. There's yes, there's no, and there's endpoints. And so let's say we pick the option for yes for drop to terrain. And we're going to go ahead and add some additional depth just so this goes under the ground. But then we're also going to say this is going to be maybe an 8-foot high wall under your wall settings. Okay, so when you set this to drop to terrain, what it's going to do is it's going to try to drop the parts of this object down to the terrain in order to create steps. So notice what this is doing is this has created an 8-foot high wall, and for every one of the segments that's in here, so if you look at your hidden geometry, every one of those lined segments in here, it's tried to drop it down to the terrain. So the way this follows along the terrain has to do with the dropped segments that are in here. And so let's say we did the same thing, but this time I've got an edge that I simplified over here, like this. So same exact curve, I just simplified it into a number of segments in here. So if we look at the way that this retaining wall drops to terrain right here, notice how I have less breaks in that object. So it's still dropping it to the terrain, but it's kind of following along here like this. And then notice how it's also extending this down below because we set the option for extend bottom to be 8 feet. Right here. Now you could set this to shorten the segments in here. I don't necessarily do a ton of that, but you definitely could. But now let's take a look at what the other options do. So this one, right, the wall is kind of following along with your terrain. Well, sometimes what you want is you want a wall with a more uniform height in here. So if I select this curve, go into my parameters, and instead of drop to terrain, yes, if we say no, what that's going to do is that's going to keep the height of the top of the wall here like this, and it's going to extrude it down through the terrain. So instead of making the top of the wall move along with your curve, if you say no to drop to terrain and then click on make wall, notice how the top of your wall is going to stay the same height, and then it's going to try to drop this down to your terrain. And so one thing to note about that is your wall height over here is going to be above your edge, and your additional depth is going to be below. So in this situation, instead of having 8 feet high above, I might type in like 1 foot right here. And then we're going to click on make wall. And so what that's going to do, right, is that went 1 foot above that edge, and then I've got whatever my additional depth is over here. So in a situation like this one, if you've got a huge thing that you're filling in over here, then what you might end up doing is you might end up adding a big additional depth in here. So you might call it like 14 feet, make a wall. And so then it's going to add that additional depth in here, and you can just use it in order to extrude through this surface right here. So if you are creating a retaining wall that needs to maintain a uniform height, that's a good way to do that. And then the last option is interesting because basically what the last option does is it's designed as a tool to create kind of a uniform slope across this object. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this just a little bit right here. We're going to move this over. But so this last option, what it'll do is it'll create a wall that's going to slope from this end where it hits the ground to this end where it hits the ground. So if we activate this, we pick the option for drop to terrain endpoints. What it's going to do is it's going to drop the 2 endpoints in here, and then it's going to try to create a sloping wall between those points right here. Now in this situation, notice that came in here, it created a sloping wall, but it's way below the ground. So in order to fix that, what you would do is you would add additional wall height above ground, right? So you would say that your additional wall height is going to be 8 feet right here. And then we're going to click on make wall like this. Well, notice how then what it does is it finds this endpoint and then it draws a wall up 8 feet. And then it also finds the endpoint over here and draws a wall up 8 feet. And then it tries to create kind of a curve along this surface like this. And so you can use that in order to create your sloping walls on terrain as well. And so there are some other interesting options in here. So for example, let's say that I was to create a top down. I'm just going to create an arc right here, and I'm just going to split it. I'll probably explode this curve so that I can group it so that this will work on it. But say that you do have a wall like this one over here. I'm going to move this down just a little bit like this. But say that you have a wall like this one and you want to create a retaining function, there are options in here for walls that are more like retaining walls. So for example, or in this case, even a wall that has a rail on the top of it. So, and I'm looking for it right now, but like say this one right here, what this is going to do is it's going to create this scenic lookout one. But if I click on make wall right here, what that's going to do is that's going to create this retaining wall back in here, and it has that additional height, which we actually didn't really need because this is probably about the proper height in here. So we'll go back to our parameters and reduce this to maybe like actually 0 feet. Let's see what that does. I have not done 0 feet. So that's actually just going to drop your rail down, which is not what you want, but we can set it to a height of like 1 foot right here, and then we can make the wall. And so what that's going to do is that's going to give you this kind of like short wall, but notice how it kind of follows along with the surface right here. And it doesn't really matter what you see below ground for the most part, but you can use this in order to create a wall that kind of like slopes along a terrain like this with a rail. Okay, and so there's some other interesting features in here, and stick around, by the way. We're going to talk about how we can create like walking paths on terrain in a little bit. But there's some other features in here that are really interesting from a what it can create standpoint. So for example, this has the option if I wanted to create fences or walls, like let's say that we were to pick maybe this wall right here. And I'm going to make a wall like this. Well, there's the 3-dimensional option, which is what we've been talking about, but there's also an option in here to create a 2-dimensional wall. So if I click on make wall right here, notice what that does is that actually creates just like a 2D profile of a wall with like follow me components, which is actually super interesting, right? Because all of these different components are just doing a follow me in here. So we're not creating a ton of like additional geometry or anything. It's literally just a wall made of these follow me components. And then there's also an option over here for just 2D hide lines. And so if I click on 2D hide lines, it's going to make that same thing, but it's going to hide all the lines along the edges. So that's actually really interesting if you were creating something like a cartoony style. Like if you look at the hidden geometry is all still in there. It just creates it as hidden geometry, which is a really interesting style when you create walls like this. And so there's a ton of things you can do with like the customization of things like the pilasters of the walls, which are basically going to be the things that show up on the corners. But let's say that we were to pick one of these walls. So we'll go with a wall like this stepped concrete one right here. Well, if you click down here, remember that all of these have different things that you can edit about like the kinds of walls that are created, but you can also set the kinds of pilasters that this is going to create. So if I use the move tool in copy mode right here with this object and make the wall, it's going to have those square pilasters, and I want to make sure that I've selected the 3D option right here, but that's going to have square pilasters. Well, I could run this same thing either with other library pilasters, so I can just adjust the style, right? So say that I wanted, we'll go with a fluted, just for fun. There's a bunch of other options in there as well, but you could create this with the fluted ones in here, and obviously you'd want to like set them a little bit differently, but you can set whatever pilasters you want with this object, including using custom objects. And so this video is getting long and there are so many features in here. There is one other thing I wanted to highlight for you, and that is how you can create a path on a surface. So most of the time what I do, if I have a path that I want to follow a certain direction, I draw it flat and then I want to kind of like drape it down on the surface, right? So in this case, I'm actually going to use Fredo Spline just because it draws better curves. Say that you had a path that was just kind of supposed to follow along with a surface like this one. I'm going to go ahead and explode this curve and then make it a group so that the tool can work with it. But there's an option in here for creating a path along this surface. So if I pick stepping stones right here, what it's going to do is it's going to drop those stones onto the surface right here and create a stepping stone path inside of my model. So you can use this to actually create paths, and that's something that you can adjust the spacing on too. So like for example, I could take this square, and first off, I want the height to be a little bit taller, or you could also make it shorter just depending on what you're trying to do. But in this case, I'm going to say this is going to be 4 inches high. And this is dropping these to terrain. And I want to say max length between segments I'm going to set is actually maybe like 4 foot right here. So we've got a little more spacing. But if I click on make wall, notice what that's going to do is that is going to create a wall that follows along with this surface right here. So you can use this in order to create paths, and in this case it's creating it with the stone just because I have the stone material selected in here, but you could toggle that off. But you can use this in order to really quickly create paths and steps and other things like that along surfaces as well. So ton of features in here. I think this one gets lost a little bit because there's so many features that people actually like give up. But I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. Would you like to see me talk more about this extension? I just love having that conversation with you guys. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.